Have you ever felt like you didn't belong even when you were supposed to? I remember the exact moment I realized I was invisible. I was 14 years old, and my mom, Debbie, asked me to step out of the family photo. "Come on, Nancy, you don't match the vibe," she said, her voice light and breezy like it was no big deal. I stood there, frozen, watching as my mother, my stepfather, and my two step-siblings, Chloe and Ethan, lined up for their picture-perfect moment. It was the kind of photo that gets posted on Facebook with captions like, "family goals." Only, I wasn't part of that goal. Debbie smiled for the camera, the same smile she always wore when she was pretending everything was fine. As if my heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 pieces. I stood off to the side, clutching my arms to my chest, trying not to cry. That was the first time I truly understood what it felt like to be overlooked, ignored by the one person who was supposed to see me. And no matter how hard I tried to hold myself together, it didn't matter. My mom had already decided I wasn't part of the picture. Later that night, while the rest of the family sat down for dinner, I stayed in my room. I couldn't bring myself to face them. Instead, I buried my hurt in my sketchbook, drawing pictures of a world where I belonged, where I was seen, not cropped out, not forgotten. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was mine. A place where I could exist without having to shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. A place where I didn't have to pretend that I didn't mind being invisible. A place where my art mattered, where I mattered. But even as I drew, part of me knew it wouldn't be enough. Not in a world where fitting in meant everything, and I never seemed to. My childhood wasn't always this way. At least, not at first. When I was younger, I wasn't invisible. I was just quiet. The kind of kid who kept her head down, got good grades, and didn't ask for much. I stayed out of trouble, and in return, my family seemed content to let me be. But that all changed when Debbie married Todd. Suddenly, the family wasn't just me and her anymore. Todd had 2 kids, Chloe and Ethan, who were loud, athletic, and eager to be the center of attention. It didn't take long for Debbie to shift her focus entirely to them. "Look at Chloe's dance recital photos," she'd gush, as if I didn't have a single talent of my own. Ethan would talk about his soccer trophies like they were the greatest achievements in the history of mankind. And all the while, my drawings, the ones I'd worked so hard on, sat on the shelf, gathering dust. It was like I didn't fit the mold they wanted, I didn't have the right look or the right interests, and it didn't matter how hard I tried. No one noticed. I stopped asking to be in the photos after that. I stopped trying to be seen, but I still held on to the hope that one day, someone would look at me and say, "I see you." Little did I know that person would not be my mother. And that day, when everything changed, was still years away. After Debbie married Todd, everything in our house changed. I wasn't just a kid anymore. I was a shadow. Todd had 2 kids, Chloe and Ethan, and they were everything I wasn't. They were loud, confident, and always at the center of attention. I couldn't figure out how they did it. How could they take up so much space in a room and make everyone else seem irrelevant? They were perfect for the life Debbie wanted. They fit into the new family she'd created, one that included fresh photos for every milestone, every vacation, every special moment. Suddenly, I wasn't even allowed to share the frame. At first, I tried to stay out of their way. I didn't want to rock the boat. I stayed in my corner, doing my homework, keeping my head down, hoping they wouldn't notice how badly I wanted to be part of that world. I'd see photos of the family trips they went on, the outings with matching t-shirts, and I'd wonder if I was invisible. Not just to them, but to Debbie too. I wasn't included in the family photos, not in the way Chloe and Ethan were. It didn't matter that I was right there, smiling for the camera, my face blurry from where they cropped me out. Or maybe I wasn't even in the frame at all. Every time Debbie posted pictures online, she'd smile brightly beside her new family, while I was either edited out or stuck off to the side, blurry and unnoticed. I couldn't help myself. I started to ask, "Do you not want me in the pictures?" I'd say nervously, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement. But every time I asked, it felt like a mistake. Debbie would look at me like I'd just asked her to do something outrageous. She'd roll her eyes and sigh, the kind of sigh that made it clear I was being unreasonable. "Nancy, you're so sensitive," she'd say, as if my feelings were some flaw, as if wanting to be seen was something I should apologize for. That phrase, "you're too sensitive," became her go-to response whenever I dared to point out how left out I felt. The more she said it, the more I believed it. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be a part of this new family after all. Maybe my presence wasn't as important as I thought. It was the holidays that sealed it for me. Christmas came, and once again, Debbie's attention was completely on Chloe and Ethan. They opened expensive gifts, new bikes, iPads, while I sat there with a notebook that had my name misspelled on the cover. When I opened it, I didn't feel the joy I was supposed to. Instead, I felt smaller, more insignificant than ever. Debbie smiled at me like everything was normal. "You like drawing, don't you?" she said, almost dismissively. It wasn't a question. It was a reminder of how little she truly knew me, how little she cared. That year, I realized I wasn't just being ignored. I was being disregarded completely, as if I didn't even matter enough to be acknowledged. It wasn't the gift itself that hurt. It was the way Debbie acted, like everything was fine, like I should be grateful for whatever scraps were thrown my way. It wasn't until later that night, after dinner, that I realized something. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. The pain I felt from their neglect was not going to define me. But the next few months were hard. They were filled with quiet moments of longing to be part of a family that didn't want me, longing to be seen, heard, and loved in the way I saw others loved. But I kept my head down because that's what I had learned to do. When it got too much to bear, I'd escape. I started spending weekends at my Grandma Lily's house, a small yellow home on the outskirts of town. It was quiet there, no judgment, no expectations. Just warm cookies, cups of cinnamon tea, and the smell of lavender that seemed to cling to the air. Grandma Lily always saw me. She never made me feel like I had to prove myself. She never told me I was too sensitive. Instead, she asked about my drawings, about my dreams. It was at Grandma's house that I started to believe in myself again. She never asked questions that made me feel small. She just gave me space to be who I was, without expectations or judgment. She saw me for who I was, not as someone who had to fit into a picture. "Have you ever thought about doing this for real?" she asked me one afternoon while I was sketching something new on my iPad. I didn't know what she meant at first. "Doing what?" I asked. "Graphic design, darling. You have an eye for it. Why not turn your talent into something more?" At first, I laughed it off. I didn't even know what graphic design was, but Grandma was persistent. She signed me up for a weekend class at the library, then another, and another. Every weekend, we'd talk about what I was learning, and Grandma would encourage me to keep every design I made. "You'll need it later," she'd say, always with that soft, knowing smile. I didn't know it then, but she was preparing me for a life that was so much bigger than the one I had at home. She was showing me that there was more to life than the suffocating family I'd been born. There was a world waiting for me. I just had to believe that it was possible. As the months passed, I spent less time at home and more time at Grandma's. My sketches became more detailed and more refined. I didn't have to fit into their picture. I was starting to create my own. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't anger that drove me. It was a quiet, steady determination to prove that I could build a life that had nothing to do with the family that had left me behind. And Grandma Lily, she was the only one who saw me. She always had. There were weekends at Grandma Lily's that felt like they could last forever. The quiet hum of the house, the smell of cinnamon tea, the soft rustle of leaves outside. It was a sanctuary. I didn't have to pretend there, didn't have to hide how much I hurt. With Grandma, I could just be. She never told me that my art was good because I needed to hear it. She told me because she saw it. There's a difference. I had spent years with my art hidden in the background, tucked away in corners where no one cared enough to look. But Grandma looked. And she looked with so much belief that it was impossible not to see myself through her eyes. Grandma Lily wasn't like Debbie. She didn't see me as someone to fix, someone to mold. She saw the things I could become before I even knew them myself. And it was at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of my drawings and sketches, that I first started to believe maybe this art thing wasn't just a way to pass the time. One Saturday afternoon, as I was putting the finishing touches on a digital design I'd been working on for weeks, Grandma sat down next to me. Her warm hands rested on the edge of the table, her fingers tracing the outline of the sketchbook I had on the table, the one filled with designs for fictional magazines and clothing lines. "I think you've got something here, Nancy," she said. "Have you ever thought about doing this for a living? You've got a real talent." I looked up at her, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could make this a career. You could turn these designs into something real, something important." I didn't know what she was talking about. I was just drawing because it made me feel alive. After all, it was the one thing in my life that felt like mine. But Grandma had a way of making things seem possible. She signed me up for a graphic design class at the community center. It was an old building, with wooden floors that creaked when you walked across them, but the people there, the teacher, the other students, made it feel like a new world. A world where I didn't have to shrink myself, where my voice, my work mattered. I couldn't afford it, of course. Debbie wouldn't even have considered it, dismissing anything outside her carefully curated life. But Grandma never let money stop her. She wrote the check herself and handed it to me with a wink. "Consider it your first step toward something big." That class changed everything. I started to see my work differently. I wasn't just sketching for fun anymore, I was creating. I was building a foundation. The more I learned, the more I realized that I had the potential to do something important. I wasn't the overlooked child who didn't matter. I was someone who had something to offer. Even when I went back home, the spark that Grandma had lit inside me never faded. But things at home? They hadn't changed. Debbie still didn't see me. She didn't notice that I was out late at class or that I was spending hours hunched over my laptop, working on new designs. She didn't even care to ask where I went when I skipped family events, or why I never seemed to care about Chloe's new clothes or Ethan's soccer games. And I didn't care either. It wasn't that I didn't love them, but I had started to realize that I wasn't the problem. I had spent years thinking that if I just tried harder, if I just fitted in more, everything would be okay. But it wasn't about fitting in. It was about finding a place where I belonged, a place where I was accepted for who I was. And that place was in my art, in the work I was doing every night at Grandma Lily's house. She didn't judge me for how I dressed, for the way I spent my weekends, or how quiet I was. She just saw the potential in me, and for the first time, I began to see it too. By the time I turned 16, I had started to think more seriously about the future. The dream wasn't just a vague hope anymore. It was something tangible, something I could build. I spent hours on my designs, refining them, pouring myself into each project as though it was my only chance to escape. But Debbie was still Debbie. She didn't notice the changes. She didn't see the late nights or the projects I was working on, let alone care about the progress I was making. One afternoon, when I came home after another graphic design class, she handed me a shopping list, one of the many she'd asked me to run for her over the years. It was nothing new. Shampoo, snacks, candles, name brand, of course. She shoved a $10 bill into my hand as if that would cover it. I looked at the list, then back at her. "This isn't enough to buy everything on the list." Debbie rolled her eyes. "Well, use your own money then. You're always at Grandma's house anyway. I'm sure she spoils you." There it was, that dismissive, condescending tone. She didn't care about me, not really. I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was just a tool, an accessory to manage, a kid who didn't fit into her picture-perfect family. And if I didn't fit, it didn't matter. It hit me then with quiet finality. I didn't fit in this life. But I was building my own, and I wasn't going to let her or anyone make me feel like I didn't belong. So I kept at it. I kept designing. I kept learning. I kept dreaming of a life that didn't depend on Debbie's approval. And as I did, I started to feel like I was finally on the path to something I could be proud of. Something real. Grandma Lily never stopped supporting me, never stopped believing in me. Every weekend, she'd sit with me while I worked, telling me, "Keep everything, Nancy. One day, you'll need it. And when the world sees what they missed, you'll be ready." And I believed her. High school was when I realized I wasn't just invisible. I was completely irrelevant. I kept doing my work and improving my designs, but no one noticed. No one asked what I was doing in my free time or why I was always scribbling in my sketchbook. I wasn't like Chloe, who had a full social calendar, or Ethan, who was constantly on the go with his sports. They were always the center of attention, always the ones who mattered. At school, it was the same thing. I blended into the background, a quiet observer of everyone else's lives. The kids who sat at the popular tables were all loud and full of jokes, while I sat off to the side, watching, sketching when I could, but never quite fitting in. My teachers liked me, sure, but they liked me because I kept my head down, did my work, and never made waves. When my report card came out with an A in every subject, no one said anything, not even Debbie. But when Chloe made the honor roll, Debbie posted it on Facebook like Chloe had just discovered the cure for cancer. She called it "Our Little Genius." And there was a whole gallery of pictures from the ceremony. I couldn't help but feel a sting, but I didn't say anything. I had stopped expecting anything from her. It wasn't just that I was ignored at home, it was that I was actively erased. I wasn't in the family photos. I wasn't in any of the group pictures that Debbie loved to post on Instagram. Chloe and Ethan were always front and center, smiling in their matching outfits. Meanwhile, I stood on the edge, cropped out, or just blurry in the background. I tried not to care, but it hurt. It hurt in ways I couldn't explain, not even to myself. Every time they posted those photos, every time they planned something without me, I felt a growing ache in my chest, like I was being erased from my own life. It wasn't just that I was invisible, it was that I was actively unwanted. There was no family ski trip for me, no beach days where I could pretend to fit in. When I asked why I wasn't invited, the answers came easily. "You don't like cold weather," Debbie would say, or "You burn too easily." But I knew better. It wasn't about the weather or the sun, it was about me. It was always about me not fitting into their picture of perfection. By the time I reached my senior year, I had given up. I didn't try to fit in anymore. I didn't try to get noticed. I had accepted that my place in this family was as an afterthought, a ghost who only appeared when it was convenient for everyone else. But I didn't care. I had my sketchbook. I had my art. I had the designs that were slowly but surely shaping my future. Every time they went on another trip, I stayed home. I never asked where I was going or why I wasn't invited. I didn't want to hear the excuses anymore. I packed a bag and I went to Grandma Lily's house. It was my refuge, my place where I was seen, where I was allowed to exist without question. Every weekend, Grandma would ask me how my classes were going, what I had learned, and how my designs were evolving. She'd sit with me at her kitchen table, quietly watching me work, telling me, "Keep going, Nancy. Don't stop. One day, they'll all see what they missed." She was right, but I didn't know that yet. What I did know was that the world outside of my family was different. It was bigger, and I was going to make sure I found my place in it, even if I had to do it alone. High school was a blur of loneliness, of silence that no one bothered to fill. But every night, in my room or at Grandma's, I worked. I poured everything into my art because it was the only thing I had left. And slowly, it became something real. No one saw it, not yet. But they would. I was starting to believe it. By the time I reached my junior year, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to wait around for my family to see me. I wasn't going to let their disregard define my future. I was going to build my own. Grandma Lily had always said, "Don't let anyone shrink your world, Nancy. You're bigger than they want you to believe." She was right. It took me a while to understand that, but I finally did. The more I worked on my designs, the more I realized how much potential I had. But I needed more. I needed to push myself, to take what was in my head and turn it into something the world could see. That's when I started researching colleges. It wasn't easy. I knew Debbie would never approve. She would scoff at the idea of me pursuing anything other than a real career, something practical, like law or medicine. anything that would put me in the same category as Chloe and Ethan, who were already on their paths to successful futures. But I didn't care. I was done trying to fit into their world. I spent hours at the library, poring over design programs and portfolios of professional designers. I didn't have a mentor in the field, but I found my way. Every time I felt doubt creeping in, I thought of Grandma's encouragement, her words, "Keep everything, Nancy. One day, you'll need it." It was like a little flame inside me, pushing me to keep going. But as much as I worked, as much as I pushed myself, there was still that looming obstacle, Debbie. She was the last person I expected support from, but in her silence, I realized something. She didn't care enough to ask what I was doing. She didn't care about my dreams, my goals, or the fact that I was building something real for myself. If I wanted to succeed, it was going to be because of my work, not because of anything she gave me. I couldn't afford art school on my own. My part-time job at the local cafe didn't make a dent in tuition costs. But Grandma Lily wasn't going to let me be held back. She had been quietly setting aside money for years, money that I had no idea about. One night, after I'd told her about a design competition I was planning to enter, she sat me down and handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from a trust fund set up for me by my late grandfather. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. "You'll need it, darling," she said, smiling through tears. "I know you're going places, Nancy, and I want to make sure you get there." That was it. That was the moment I knew I could do this. Grandma's belief in me and her quiet support gave me everything I needed to move forward. The rest, I would have to make happen myself. The next few months were a blur of applications, essays, and sleepless nights working on my portfolio. But it wasn't as hard as I expected. For the first time, I was working on something that was mine, something that mattered to me, and that made all the difference. I didn't care if Debbie noticed, or if Chloe or Ethan thought I was wasting my time. I was doing this for me. When the acceptance letters came in, I felt a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. I had been accepted into 3 art schools, 2 of which offered full scholarships. But it wasn't until I looked at the letter from the prestigious private university in New York that I truly understood the gravity of what I'd done. I had earned a spot in one of the top visual design programs in the country. My dreams were no longer just dreams, they were a reality. Yet, as I held the acceptance letter in my hands, I knew something was missing. Debbie didn't even notice the letter when it arrived. It sat unopened on the counter for days. She didn't ask about it. She didn't care. That was when I realized that I didn't need her to see me anymore. I didn't need her approval to make my dreams come true. The validation I was seeking, the acceptance I longed for, wasn't going to come from her. It had to come from within. The day after my graduation, I packed my things and left. There was no party, no photos, no celebration with my family. It wasn't that I didn't want to celebrate. It was that I didn't want them to be part of it. My departure wasn't a rejection. It was a necessary step toward my future, one that didn't rely on their approval. Grandma Lily helped me pack. She made sure I had everything I needed, reminding me again, "Keep going, Nancy. Don't look back." I didn't. I boarded the bus with my thrift store suitcase and my dreams packed tightly in my chest. I was ready. Ready to step into a world that had no expectations of me, other than the ones I created for myself. And this time, when I looked ahead, I saw a future I could truly be proud of. By the time I finished college, I had completely transformed. Not just in terms of my skills as a designer, but in the way I saw myself. No longer was I the girl who faded into the background, the daughter who never quite belonged. I had become someone I was proud of. I had built a life on my terms, without the need for anyone's approval. In my first year of college, I felt like I had been given a chance to start over. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was a world where I could finally breathe. My professors recognized my talent, and my classmates supported me. I felt like I had found my people, a place where I wasn't invisible, where my voice mattered. It was liberating. Every project I took on felt like a victory, not just over the doubts that had haunted me, but over the family that had ignored me for so long. And then came the breakthrough. My roommate, Tessa, was a whirlwind of energy. She was outgoing, chaotic, and hated everything I made. One day, after seeing some of my designs, she showed them to a friend who worked at a boutique in the city. They needed someone to design their seasonal lookbook, and Tessa, without even asking me, had passed along my portfolio. I was hesitant, unsure if my work was ready for the real world, but she was relentless. The boutique hired me for the job, and it was my first real gig as a designer. It wasn't much, but it was everything to me. I spent sleepless nights working, pouring my heart and soul into the project. When it was finished, they posted my designs on their social media, and that's when things began to snowball. One client turned into two, then three, and suddenly, I was balancing schoolwork with real-world projects. My name was starting to get out there. The opportunities kept coming. A local ad agency hired me part-time, and after graduation, a brand consulting firm offered me a summer internship. I threw myself into my work, staying up late, working weekends, and stacking my resume with everything I could. Slowly but surely, I was climbing the ladder. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. All the while, I kept my head down, letting my work speak for itself. But I wasn't just building a career. I was building a life, one that was entirely mine, one that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or validation. It wasn't about proving them wrong, not really. It was about proving that I could stand on my own, that I could create something out of nothing. As I moved up in the industry, I started to feel something I had never felt before: respect. My family, on the other hand, remained in their bubble. Debbie continued posting her perfect family photos, Chloe's latest achievements, Ethan's sports victories, and their ever-growing collection of family moments. But I wasn't in those pictures, not anymore. It wasn't even a passing thought. And I didn't care. I had built something that no one could take from me. The real breakthrough came when I was invited to a national design conference where my student work was showcased. That night, after my presentation, I was approached by someone from CNV, a marketing firm known for launching big names in fashion and lifestyle. They had seen my work, and they were interested. The executive director sent me an email directly. "Nancy, your eye for storytelling is rare. Let's talk." That email changed everything. I had just graduated, and I was already in demand. Within weeks, I received an offer to work with CNV, and by the time I was 27, I was the lead creative strategist at one of the top firms in the industry. The dreams I had once sketched out in my room at Grandma's house were no longer just fantasies. They were a reality. The day I got the job offer from CNV, I sat in my office, staring at the email. I was still in shock. I had come so far from the girl who stood alone on the sidelines of a family photo. But as I sat there, the weight of the moment started to sink in. I had made it, on my own, without the support of my family, and then, not long after that, the call came. It was a Thursday morning, and I was in the break room, sipping coffee and preparing a pitch for a new client, when my assistant knocked and handed me a note. I opened it to see that Channel 7's morning show had confirmed. They wanted to feature me as part of their Young Visionaries segment. They wanted to tell my story. The segment aired the following Monday. The anchors smiled as they introduced me, asking about my journey from an overlooked teen to a creative leader. They pulled up old photos of my designs from college, and the comments flooded in. Inspiring, talented, and where has she been hiding? I wasn't watching when it aired, but I could imagine Debbie sitting there, her fork frozen in her hand as she saw me on TV. I wasn't the invisible child she had ignored. I was everywhere. It was a Thursday afternoon when the message came. My phone buzzed, interrupting the quiet hum of my office. I glanced at it, expecting another work-related email, but instead, it was from Debbie, my mother. The words seemed almost absurd as I read them. "Nancy, it's your mother. My 50th birthday is next month. We're doing a nice brunch at Belmore Gardens. Very exclusive. You probably don't know it. Be there at 11 a.m. Sharp. Don't embarrass me." That was it. No, how are you? No, I'm proud of you. Just a demand, framed as a royal summons. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling the weight of the years of neglect flood back. The years of being ignored, erased, and pushed aside. And then, strangely, I felt a burst of laughter bubble up inside me. Not out of spite, but because it was almost ridiculous. 13 years of silence, and this was the grand comeback. A brunch invite masquerading as a demand. I didn't reply immediately. I let the message sit there, staring at me, like a ghost from the past that was too late to be acknowledged. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about reconciling. It was about me showing up to fulfill her narrative, to be the daughter she could parade around like an accessory. I wasn't going to play that game. Instead of deleting the message, I laughed. A quiet, almost amazed laugh. And then I did something I hadn't expected myself to do. I pulled out a small envelope from my desk drawer and slid it across the table to my assistant, asking her to handle it. The certificate inside? An all-inclusive luxury spa retreat in the Swiss Alps. Private chef, mountain view suite, chauffeur-driven car. 5 figures of luxury. A gift for a person who never once valued me, but only saw me as someone she could control. I wasn't going to give it to her, but I wanted her to see it, to see what she had lost. On the day of the brunch, I dressed simply but elegantly. No designer logos, no flashy heels, just a black jumpsuit and a simple gold necklace. The kind of understated elegance that people didn't notice until it was already gone. I arrived 5 minutes early, as I had promised, and was escorted into the private garden room of Belmore Gardens. The space was exactly as I'd imagined. Faux fancy, watered-down mimosas, decor that screamed expensive if you didn't know better. The only real luxury in the room, as far as I was concerned, was me. Everyone was already seated when I entered. Chloe and Ethan, of course, were at the head of the table. And there was Debbie, dripping in gold sequins, flashing that smile of hers that never quite reached her eyes. She blinked when she saw me, as though she'd forgotten I was coming. "Oh, you came," she said, forcing a smile. Her voice was laced with condescension, but it was still the same, unmistakable tone. "You could have dressed up more for the occasion." I nodded and took a seat at the far end of the table. My eyes scanned the room, and I could feel the tension building. The uncomfortable silence that followed was thick with expectation. Everyone was waiting for me to conform, to fall into the role they had designated for me. But I wasn't playing along. I wasn't going to apologize for my absence or my quiet dignity. I wasn't going to pretend I needed their approval to feel whole. I had moved on, and I was no longer seeking their validation. The brunch unfolded like a low-budget soap opera. Chloe handed Debbie a personalized jewelry box, and Ethan presented her with a monogrammed designer tote. Each gift was met with fake tears, exaggerated gratitude, and a flurry of applause. I watched in silence, a quiet observer of the carefully constructed world they had built. Then it was my turn. I didn't stand up. I didn't make a speech. I simply reached into my bag and placed a small, neatly wrapped box in front of Debbie. No fanfare. No show, just a soft, happy birthday. Her eyes narrowed as she stared at the box, her lips pulling into a tight smile. This better not be one of those minimalist gifts people post about. I didn't respond, just waited. And then, with a calm voice, I spoke. "That's a certificate for a luxury retreat in Switzerland, the kind of place where people go to disappear from the noise." Her face went pale. "You're lying." I smiled softly, letting the moment out. "I was going to give it to you, but now I realize you don't want me. You just want what I can give you. You always have." I stood up then, my back straight, my confidence unshakable. I gave her one last look, letting the silence hang in the air. "You told me to stay out of the picture," I said quietly. So I did. But I didn't disappear. I just got sharper. With that, I turned and walked out of the room. No one followed me. Not a single person moved as I made my exit. The taxi was waiting outside. I didn't hear from Debbie for weeks after the brunch. There were no more birthday greetings, no more half-hearted invitations to family events. I'm sure she told everyone I was ungrateful, that I had abandoned her, but it didn't matter. I had walked away from that life with a quiet sense of relief. But then one afternoon, as I was sitting on the balcony of my small apartment, enjoying a cup of tea, I received another message. It was from Debbie. "I know you're mad. but I'm your mother. It's time we put this behind us. I need you, Nancy. Brooke could use your help with her branding. Jared's trying to break into real estate, and we need your creative eye. I'm throwing a family dinner at Belmore Gardens next month. Don't be difficult. Please. I stared at the screen, feeling a sickening mix of frustration and something deeper. Maybe sorrow. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, not even close. It was a desperate attempt to latch on to something that she'd ignored for years. I almost deleted it, but I didn't. I just let it sit there, like a reminder of how far we had fallen. Instead of replying, I walked to the small kitchen, opened the drawer where I kept the certificate from the Swiss retreat, and slid it into my bag. Later that night, I sat with Grandma Lily at her kitchen table, just as I had done so many times before. Her warm hands were wrapped around her cup of tea, and I could see the curiosity in her eyes as she watched me. She never asked about my work unless I brought it up, but tonight, she could sense something was different. "You heard from her, didn't you?" Grandma asked, her voice soft but knowing. I nodded, my heart heavy. "She wants me back, but not for me. Just for what I can do for her. She doesn't see me, Grandma, not for who I am. She wants the girl who fits her idea of family." Grandma sighed, her eyes sad but understanding. "That's the way she's always been. It's not about you, Nancy. It never was. You've got to remember that. I don't think I can ever forgive her for how she treated me, how she ignored me all those years." Grandma placed her hand over mine, her touch comforting. "Forgiveness isn't about her, sweetheart. It's about you. You can choose to carry the weight of anger, or you can choose to let it go. But that doesn't mean you have to let her back in. You've built a life for yourself now, one that matters. Don't let anyone, especially her, take that away from you." I felt a lump form in my throat. For so long I had wanted to be seen by Debbie, to have her acknowledge my worth. But now I realized that the only person who needed to see me was myself. The next morning, I packed a small gift box, carefully wrapping it up in soft paper. Inside was the Swiss retreat certificate, now with Grandma's name on it. She had always dreamed of seeing the Alps, and she had always been the one who saw me when no one else did. This was my way of saying thank you, of showing her that, no matter what had happened with the rest of my family, she would always have a place in my life. I wrote her a note, simple but heartfelt. For the woman who always saw me, even when I couldn't see myself. I drove to her house that afternoon, the air crisp with the promise of change. When I walked through the front door, Grandma was sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting quietly. When she looked up, she smiled, that knowing smile that made me feel safe. I handed her the box, and she looked at me, her eyes wide in surprise. "You didn't have to do this, Nancy," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I did," I replied, sitting down next to her. "You've always been there for me. You helped me see who I am, and I'm never going to forget that." Grandma opened the box, and her eyes filled with tears when she saw the certificate. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Instead, she just sat there, holding it in her hands, her tears glistening in the soft afternoon light. "This is too much, dear," she whispered, wiping her eyes. "But thank you. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You've already given me everything I need." That night, after dinner, we sat outside on the porch, the sky darkening into twilight. I could hear the distant sounds of the city, but here, in this quiet space, I felt at peace. Grandma Lily's presence was a constant in my life, a steady foundation. She was the one who believed in me when no one else did, and now, with every step I took, I carried that belief with me. Carla, Debbie, would probably keep telling everyone I was ungrateful, that I owed her something, but I knew the truth. I didn't owe her a thing. What I had built on my own, with my own hands. I had created a life that no one could take away from me. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The family photo might have been perfect without me, but the life I had built, it was better because I wasn't in it. Through everything, I learned that true belonging doesn't come from fitting into someone else's picture. It comes from creating your own. For so long, I had yearned for my mother's approval, hoping she'd see me, hoping she'd recognize my worth. But what I realized is that my worth was never hers to give. It was mine all along. The lesson isn't about seeking validation from others. It's about embracing who you are, even when no one else does. By doing that, I finally found the freedom to live for myself, not for anyone else's expectations. That's when I truly became free.